He built a custom wheelchair to hide a gun. His kitchen was a drug laboratory. His bedroom was a weapons workshop. And when police finally raided his flat, they found an entire arsenal hidden behind cupboards, toilets, even stitched into his mobility chair. Some people started calling him Islington's Walter White, not because he cooked vast quantities of drugs, but because he built the kind of setup you'd expect from a TV show, not a residential flat. His name was Glenn Brigham, a 35-year-old disabled man who turned an ordinary council property into a secret firearms and drug factory. And what police found inside shocked even experienced detectives. It was October 2018 when police arrived at Brigham's flat on Caledonian Road, North London. The warrant they carried was simple: suspicion of drug production. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. But the moment officers walked through the door, they realised this wasn't the average cannabis operation. The air was thick with a chemical smell. Heat lamps glowed from the kitchen, and around every corner were tools and equipment that simply didn't belong in a one-bedroom flat. What they were about to uncover would grow stranger with every step. And the first big shock wasn't even the weapons, it was the kitchen. The kitchen had been completely transformed. What should have been a place for cooking meals was now an improvised drug laboratory. Officers found extraction tubes, funnels, scales, measuring kits, chemical apparatus, containers of cannabis and tools used to produce a high-strength cannabis derivative known as shatter. More than 600 grams of the concentrated drug were found, alongside 5 kilograms of bagged cannabis ready for distribution. This setup required planning. It required knowledge. It required time. But even with all that, the kitchen wasn't the most alarming room in the flat, because next, officers walked into the workshop. Glenn Brigham had turned another room into a fully equipped weapons workshop. Drills, lathes, a saw, molds for bullets, tools designed to modify blank fire guns into more dangerous weapons. And tucked into corners, hidden behind furniture, and placed around the room were parts of firearms in various stages of conversion. Frames of handguns, slide bolts, empty magazines, adapters used to fire rubber projectiles. It was the kind of setup the police normally find in organised criminal workshops, not in the home of one disabled man working alone. But the most alarming discovery wasn't in the workshop. It was in Glenn's wheelchair. Leaning at the foot of his bed was a black, everyday mobility wheelchair. At first glance, nothing unusual. But when officers leaned in, they spotted a custom-built compartment on the side panel, a hidden insert, something handmade. Inside it was a BBM minigap pistol, a prohibited weapon capable of firing 2 tear gas rounds, and, with attachments, launching rubber projectiles. It wasn't stored, it wasn't disassembled, it wasn't boxed, it was loaded. A magazine was inside, an adapter was screwed to the front, and it was positioned so Glenn could reach it from his seat. His wheelchair wasn't just mobility equipment, it was a concealed holster for a functioning firearm. And still, this wasn't everything. When officers moved deeper into the flat, they entered the bedroom. And that's where the full scale of the arsenal became clear. On the floor was a deactivated AK-47 resting beside an African shield and spear. Around the room were 6 prohibited firearms, all capable of firing tear gas cartridges. Some were Turkish, some were German or Italian. All had been part converted or were ready for further modification. And then, behind the toilet, more parts, ammunition components, handgun frames, empty magazines, slide bolts. It was an entire production line hidden inside a small London flat. Glenn Brigham was 35 years old. He had a stitch-mark tattoo trailing from his right eye and scales inked around his neck. He was physically disabled and reliant on his wheelchair at all times. But his disability hadn't stopped him from building something complex, dangerous and deliberate. People around him never suspected a thing. He lived quietly. he kept to himself. He did not draw attention. But behind closed doors, he was running a dual criminal enterprise. One part drugs, one part weapons. What police wanted to know was simple. Why? But that answer never fully emerged. As evidence was bagged and photographed, officers realized the scale of what they were dealing with. 6 prohibited firearms, multiple imitation guns, firearm conversion tools, a bullet mold, an AK-47, weapons hidden in furniture, weapons hidden in toilets, and a loaded gun hidden in a wheelchair. Police arrested Glenn at the scene. He admitted 6 counts of possessing a prohibited firearm, 1 count of producing Class B drugs, and 1 count of possessing Class B drugs. Another charge, possession with intent to supply, was left on fire. Even seasoned officers were stunned. They later described the flat as a makeshift drugs and firearms factory, and every inch of that description was accurate. When Brigham appeared at Suffolk Crown Court, the prosecution laid out the case piece by piece. They showed photographs of the wheelchair gun, the loaded magazine, the rubber ball adapter, the workshop equipment, the bullet molding tools, the AK-47, the imitation and converted firearms, and the cannabis laboratory. The court heard how Brigham had converted his entire home into a system for producing drugs and modifying weapons. The judge described it as an operation that posed serious risk, not just to the public, but to anyone who might have purchased the weapons he was producing. This wasn't carelessness or accident. It was organised, planned, and executed with precision. Judge Michael Gledhill sentenced Glenn Brigham to 6 years in prison. In the end, the most unsettling part of the case isn't the weapons alone. It's how easily an ordinary flat, behind an ordinary door, became a sophisticated workshop, a lab in the kitchen, a factory in the bedroom, a gun hidden in a wheelchair designed for daily mobility, and an arsenal scattered through the property like everyday clutter. This wasn't a major criminal organization. It wasn't a gang. It wasn't a network. It was one man working quietly in a small flat in North London. Had the police not acted when they did, those weapons could have found their way onto the streets in a city already facing rising firearm incidents. But perhaps the most haunting part is the simplicity. You can never truly know what exists behind a closed door, or how close a weapons pipeline might be to your own street, or how someone hidden in plain sight can build a factory without anyone noticing. And in this case, it all began with one modified wheelchair, and ended with one of London's strangest and most dangerous home workshops being shut down for good.